What is the biggest mistake that the Cowboys have made in the last decade? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast
Locked
Network, your
On.
team every day.
Locked
On.
Locked
On.
Cowboys.
Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that self-journey and self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We are answering more of your Twitter questions today. First one up, Landon. This one from Mike. He wants to know, what is the biggest mistake that the Cowboys have made over the last decade?
So this is an interesting question because you and I were actually discussing before the show. Biggest is a subjective term, right? It's like, what's the most boneheaded, stupid mistake? And what's the most consequential mistake? Because I think that those are in conflict with each other, at least when we come up with our each individual answers. I think to me, I'm kind of banting about a couple different things, but I think one of the ones that seems top to me is you can easily go with some of the bad contract choices. I'm sure you'll go over a couple of them. Jalen Smith is signing comes to mind. But I think to me, the one that may be the most consequential is waiting that extra year to sign Dak Prescott. Like, I think if they had signed Dak Prescott a year earlier and given to his kind of demands a little bit earlier, they would have gotten a better deal. That may have opened things up for them to have a little bit more space last season to kind of do a little bit more. And I just think as far as like consequence, like that cost them, it really did kind of screw up a lot of their leverage with Dak in general, even for this contract, honestly. And it also kind of screwed up, didn't screw up the cap, but it definitely made operating things a little bit tighter.
Harder.
Maybe you don't cut Amari Cooper, or don't feel the need to cut Amari Cooper as much if you work out a deal and you can have a little bit more wiggle room. I just think, to me, the biggest mistake has to do with like the most amount of consequence. And even though it wasn't so much boneheaded as like maybe some of the other contracts we'll talk about it, the consequence of not getting it done in a timely manner may have a heavier effect than some of the other ones. We'll talk about some of the draft stuff too, because I do think there's a couple there too.
The hard part about that one is I just don't know how motivated Dak was to sign a contract like in 2019, right? Because, I mean, we could say, hey, they should have signed him to a $35 million deal.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dak kind of knew, like, the longer that he waited, no matter what happened, he was going to get more money. So I agree with you. I think that's a huge one. But I don't think they're all to blame.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I think that's what I guess I mean by boneheaded versus consequential. It's like they didn't like fumble the ball. It's just
because they still got it done, right?
Because they still got it done, and they were kind of put into a situation that they couldn't seem to work themselves out of anyways.
Yeah.
There are other like self-owned goals, I guess, that you could call that maybe aren't as detrimental, but are still more embarrassing. And I think we can talk about a couple of those.
I've got two. The first one to me is fairly obvious. It's the Ezekiel Elliott contract extension in 2019, not the draft pick back in 2016. Although, I mean, there's a lot of people that disagree with that at the time. There's no doubt that you got an awesome, awesome player in 2016, 17, and 18, right? An all-pro caliber running back.
Yep.
It's the draft, right? If you can tell me that you're getting that caliber of player for the first 3 years of his career, I'm not going to really criticize that pick. It's the contract extension coming off all of those touches. You already started to see him decline a little tiny bit at the end of the 2018 season. In 2019, the Cowboys still had the final year of his rookie contract, the 5th-year option, and 2 franchise tags available to them at Ezekiel Elliott. They could have just kind of slow played it and moved on from him, or they've been after the 2019, 2020, after the 2022 season, which exactly where we are without giving him a ton of money. Instead, I feel like they panicked a little bit. They caved into Zeke's wishes and made him the highest paid running back in the league. And it's going to cost Dallas a lot this year on the cap and then next year on the cap as well.
Zeke's agent played the timing of that whole situation perfectly.
Yes.
And that's so that they can get the optimal amount of leverage. And, you know, I think I could make an argument that it wasn't as boneheaded as I'm using boneheaded like that's a term now. That it wasn't as kind of just ill-advised as it's easy to say now, right? Like,
Yeah.
I will not argue with the idea of it potentially being a bad situation to sign a second contract to a running back. Like, that's kind of been well-torn argument, well-treaded. We don't need to get into that. I will say that the Cowboys must have felt with their backs to the wall with that whole situation because they didn't really make any plans for Zeke not to be there. I think they kind of got caught off guard a little bit by Zeke suddenly not showing up to camp. And you're right. I think that there have been times when the Cowboys have been put in situations where they have no leverage or they're negotiating on their other foot, right? Like they don't have good footing. And they panic and they make deals that
the thing is they had the leverage of that one. Like Zeke wasn't going to hold out for an entire season, right? Like
I know, but I you made this point too, and I understand what you're saying. Like that he didn't have that they could have just held out, they could have just waited, and that what happens if they win all 3 games and I do think you're right, and I'm not arguing against that, but I will counter that by saying these are also the same people who were ahead of the Cowboys when they tried that same technique with Emmitt Smith, and they went 0-3. And then they really lost all their leverage, and then they had to sign Emmitt to his deal. That ended up working out fine because they won the Super Bowl and all that stuff. But as far as like that negotiation tactic, they've already done that and completely lost it all. So I can understand why they didn't do that, but it doesn't make their poor decision, I guess, any better.
Yeah, that was just one where you just know the history of these running backs and with how many touches Zeke had, not only in the first 3 years of his career, but also college.
Yeah.
Man, it's a lot to give somebody that much guaranteed money 4 to 5 years down the road when you just have no idea what his body is going to look like. That's a tough one. I've got one more that actually is over the course of, I think, 3 or 4 years. I want to talk about next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. But when we spend all of our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so that you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online, designed to be convenient. It's flexible and it's suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. We want to let you know that on Friday, we're going to be breaking down the Cowboys schedule. We're going to get some news about who they played week 1, who they play on Thanksgiving, which I think by default, it has to be the Patriots now that the Jets are playing on Black Friday.
I was trying to figure it out, like if it could be anyone but the Patriots, and I'm not seeing how it could be, honestly.
Well, because of this weird CBS Fox thing where it's not tied to a conference, it might be a little bit different, but I got to assume that's who they're going to be playing. So we'll break it down on Friday. Make sure you guys tune in for that. One other mistake that I want your thoughts on. To me, it's how they mismanaged the wide receiver position starting in 2017, kind of all the way up until 2020, I guess 2019. So just to recap, right? 2017, Des Bryant is kind of starting to break down, although you saw moments, right? And there just wasn't a reliable number 2 on the roster. It was Cole Beasley out of the slot, Terrence Williams had kind of played himself, out of a bigger role, right? So you go into the 2018 offseason, you cut Dez, you bring back Terrence Williams, you bring back Cole Beasley, and the only move that you really made was they signed Deontay Thompson that offseason, right? And that, because they weren't more aggressive that offseason, either drafting like Calvin Ridley or DJ Moore in round 1, they ended up having to make this panic trade for Amari Cooper. And Amari played so well, and then they decided not to give him a contract extension right after that season. He has another really good season in 2019, and all of a sudden he hits the open market, and Washington offers him a bunch of money. The Cowboys are forced to match it. 2 years later, they're trying to get out of that contract because it is so much money. I think it all starts from that 2018 offseason by believing that they could have Cole Beasley and Deontay Thompson and Allen Hurns, and that was good enough.
But I also think 100% all that is ridiculous and wrong. But I also think that look at how much there was that could go wrong. Like you even suggested, right? Drafting Calvin Ridley, right? Like, let's play that out a little bit. First of all, you hated Calvin Ridley.
That's true.
I know you weren't advocating for drafting Calvin Ridley when that happened.
Yes.
Second of all, Calvin Ridley obviously had some off-field stuff that happened. Who knows if that would have still happened if he went to the Cowboys? But the point is that yes, the Cowboys wide receiver management has been a disaster field, even when it was good at times, right? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's a lot of kind of terrible situations that the Cowboys continually fell into. Even the Amari Cooper situation, right? Like, they traded for him, they got a great player, they got production out of him. The worm clearly turned at some point after what you mentioned, the Washington money, the matching they had to do. The money became kind of not so worth it. They draft CeeDee Lamb. They get this. They finally get some good news, right?
Yes,
like
they not lucked out, because that's the wrong word. They drafted the player, but
luck is a part of this. We can't deny that luck is a huge, and that's, I guess, what my point is that there's some bad luck that happened with a lot of this stuff. And I think that a lot of it is definitely the fault of inaction, right? Like the lack of clear plan and motivation. I guess the other side I'm going to not argue, but just suggest is that even if they had a clear plan, all the clear plans that we've suggested would have had incredible pitfalls as well. So I think the Cowboys got themselves into a situation where by the time Dez Bryant was ready to retire, what they didn't consider is that all three of their starting wide receivers needed to go. Like, Cole Beasley had fallen off a cliff. Terrence Williams had really fallen off a cliff. And Dez was not the guy that could make those other two worthwhile anymore. So I think you basically lost the last bit of wide receiver talent that you had overnight after the 2017 season. I'm getting
it was 2017. Yeah, because they went into 2018. Again, they had a chance to draft either DJ Moore or Calvin Ridley. Obviously, you mentioned my thoughts on Ridley, but they should have been more aggressive. And from the rumors, they were, right? Like, they literally like Sammy Watkins and Allen Robinson, but they didn't want to pay. I don't even remember the number at the time. Was it 15 or 16 million for one of those two receivers?
It was Watkins, I think, that they were talking.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, those guys were both the free agent ones. And I get not wanting to pay Sammy Watkins, and that was a good move. The problem was that striking out at Sammy Watkins didn't mean that you couldn't make any other move at receiver. You needed to go do something else. And I honestly, it almost cost them the 2018 season. They were so bad in the first 2 months of the season because their wide receivers were awful, to the point where I was wondering if it was ruining Dak, right? Dak just did not play well until they got Amari, and then things kind of turned the corner. And I still think they're feeling some of the effects of that, right? Like, now Amari Cooper's not here. They overpaid Michael Gallup coming off an injury. We still don't know what their wide receiver core is going to be like this year, and it's super expensive.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that I would throw in there, right, is that the Cowboys. One of the things that we haven't really ever taken the time to step back, and we're still working on one question, for God's sake. One thing that we haven't really taken the time to step back is the downside to kind of being forced into a team rebuild before we were ready. right?
Yes.
Like, because
Yes.
think about the order of how these events happen, right? We were trying to get one more year out of Romo, right? When
Mhm.
he hit the turf in Seattle, I mean, in my mind, it was game over. Like the team was gonna have to rebuild. It was gonna have to, start
You're
over
looking at
from
another
scratch.
4-12 season, right?
You just drafted a running back 4th overall, like to kind of buoy and facilitate this team that you have in place, right? Suddenly you hit on Dak Prescott, and we got so caught up in how exciting that was that we got Dak that we didn't take the time to realize this team was not in a good place
No.
to reconfigure itself for a new quarterback.
Well,
They
and
tried
remember,
to
like the
make
year before, the year
Yeah, go
before
ahead.
that, they were 4-12, but they went 1-11 without Tony Romo that season.
Yeah,
It's bad.
yeah. So I think it shows you that I think is something that we haven't really examined. Just like in a post-mortem for all of this, right? Is that the Cowboys were put into a situation where they were putting their pedal to the metal to try to finish a Super Bowl run with Tony Romo. Suddenly, you take out the main piece, you swap it out with the young quarterback, and you have this incredibly mismatched team of
Mhm.
veteran offensive talent that's ready to go, not ready for learning with the new quarterback, and a young quarterback, and the kind of recycling of all those pieces. It ended up taking the Cowboys a lot longer than it should have because they had spent so long kind of meticulously building up a receiver core for Tony Romo.
I was gonna say
and
yes
then they
for
had to start
Romo
over
because these
from
guys didn't
scratch.
fit Dak, right?
No, yeah, exactly.
Des Bryant, one of my favorite players of all time. I mean, I absolutely love him. Just not a fit with Dak.
No.
And this happens, right? Like you can have really good players that just don't fit together. I think Cole Beasley was an okay fit. Terrence Williams was a horrendous fit with Dak. It was a receiving core that just didn't match up well with his strengths, and that's why you saw like somebody like Bryce Butler come in and have some success with Dak. Like that was a receiver that meshed better with him. But I think you're right. This team was not built for Dak early on in his career.
And it just took a really long time to, instead of blow it up and rebuild, to kind of slow reload,
Yep.
which is what this has been going on. And frankly, that's honestly what happened to Tony when he became the quarterback, right? Is that it was a shock when we suddenly found Tony Romo, and the Cowboys weren't necessarily it wasn't like the team building idea of let's get all these pieces in place, then draft a rookie quarterback.
Yes.
Now you've got 4 or 5 years of rookie quarterback deal with a great team in place. The Cowboys haven't ever gotten that opportunity because the Cowboys haven't drafted a first-round starter quarterback since
Steve Walsh.
Troy Aikman. So yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, actually, same year, Steve Walsh and Troy.
Yeah,
Aikman.
exactly, 2 of them, right?
So they got it all out of the way. They did it.
That's right. They just they look. We're gonna do 2 now, and let's not worry about it later.
All right, let's do one more question when we get back. All right, this one from at FFB Garage. He wants to know: will the Cowboys run the ball more this season? Mike McCarthy has said some stuff in press conference about wanting to establish the run. Landon, what are your thoughts?
What did I tell you when you said that Mike McCarthy said he wanted to run the ball more?
Yeah, don't believe anything Mike McCarthy says.
I think I said something to the extent of Mike McCarthy says a lot of things.
He does,
and I think that's kind of the answer here is, and I think you've pointed it out. Lots of people point out. Certainly, the Green Bay Packer faithful have pointed it out. They've heard this song before, and then they wanted Mike McCarthy to run the football more, and he wouldn't.
They wouldn't.
So
he's not going to. I mean, they're going to run the ball sub, but
yeah, he's a West Coast guy, guys. Like he's old school West Coast offense. His idea of running the football is a short pass to the running back in the flat. Like that's they will definitely run the football, and it may be on pace similar to what they did last year. I'd have a hard time believing that they will run the football more than they did last year. That would be surprising to me.
And here's the thing, because listen, fantasy football Twitter is ridiculous sometimes, and I love you guys, but you guys are awful. They're looking at like the Cowboys rushing attempts per game last year, and I think they were 10th, right? And I think that was the highest of Mike McCarthy's career. But they're missing so much context in there. Let's give you some. the Cowboys were without their starting quarterback for 6 games last year, right?
Mhm.
They had a backup quarterback who they really wanted to hide. So the best way they did to do that was to run the ball and lean on your defense, right? So again, you throw out those 6 games and you look at Dak in the other 11 games, their pass run rate was, I mean, they were one of the more pass happy teams in the league, right? On top of that, when Dak came back early in the season, they really tried to limit his number of passing attempts because he was playing with
Yeah.
a broken thumb, right?
That's
They
right.
didn't want him to throw the ball a ton.
That's
On
right.
top of that, there was like 5 games where the Cowboys had 20-point leads in the fourth quarter, and there was just no reason to throw the ball. So they just ran the crap out of the ball. They are not going to run the ball at a much, much higher rate than they did last year. It's just unless they're blowing teams out all the time, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, I look, and I also think that we have to remember that Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator, and I think that running the football a lot is part of Kellen Moore's identity, is more than it is Mike McCarthy's. Think about where Kellen Moore came from, like Boise State, from Scott Linehan. Like, they want to run the football and then run play action. That's very much part of the Coryell system and the kind of mix and match of what his identity is. So I think all the points you made, plus the fact that Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator, all points to the fact that we can't just extrapolate out what happened last season without any context to what it was. And I think historical precedent on what Mike McCarthy likes to call is probably a better indicator of what he's going to call, as opposed to a small sample size that has incredible amount of context that you just laid out. So, again, Mike McCarthy says a lot of things, and frankly, I'm okay with it. Like, I would rather
throw so much chum out there to just get people talking, right? Like, think about the offensive line comment that he made a couple years ago. Oh, this isn't fantasy football, about moving offensive linemen around. And what do? We see Zach Martin playing right tackle like 2 games later. We see Tyron Smith moving from left tackle to right tackle. We hear Terrence Steele maybe moving to left guard. Like, he's just going to say stuff. Just ignore it.
Yeah, who cares? Like, honestly, if he's lying just to throw people off, great. I don't care. I'm on board with that.
Yes.
Throw people off the trail. It's like the draft stuff. Like, honestly, like, I would rather be part of the fooled and then be happy with the results. The Cowboys got what they want because they didn't tip their hand than for the Cowboys' plans to be broadcast out to everybody in the world. So I'm okay with McCarthy saying what he wants and then doing what he wants later separately of that.
I also saw some people concerned, like the Cowboys, their pace of play is going to be way down with McCarthy wanting to run the ball more. Mike McCarthy, during his time in Green Bay, they averaged 64.5 plays per game. Do you know how many plays per game the Cowboys averaged last year with Kellen Moore? 64.7 plays per game.
I mean, just think back to what Aaron Rodgers was doing, guys. Like, do you guys not remember how Aaron Rodgers played? Like, they're constantly running up to the line of scrimmage. Yeah, I think let's let it play out. But historical precedent probably is a better indicator of what's going to happen than, again, a small sample size without a lot of context.
I think people are so worried about going from Kellen Moore to Brian Schottenheimer, who has always been a more run-heavy offensive coordinator, but Schottenheimer's not calling the plays, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's going to help design the run game stuff, but he's not going to be the one calling the plays. And we just kind of know, like, Mike McCarthy defaults to, let's throw the crap out of the ball, right? Especially if you've got all these receivers and a good quarterback. Why would you not?
Brian's the offensive coordinator. Marty is not the head coach here, guys. So we don't need to worry about that. I think, look, Schottenheimer's job is to organize the offense, kind of create some plays. But as far as whether we're running or throwing the football on first down, that's Mike McCarthy's call.
Yes, it's going to be just fine. All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you guys for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go check out Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.